how sometimes you take a job just to pay the bills, thinking it'll be temporary, straightforward work. That's exactly what I thought when I applied to be a night janitor at the abandoned Riverside Mall outside Detroit. What I discovered there changed everything I believed about reality itself. My name is Marcus, and 3 months ago I was desperately job hunting after getting laid off from my warehouse position. The economy was brutal, and I was running out of savings fast. When I saw the posting for overnight maintenance at what they called a transitional retail space, I didn't ask too many questions. The pay was surprisingly good for janitorial work and they were hiring immediately. Red flag number one, but I ignored it. The interview was weird from the start. Instead of meeting at the mall, they had me come to a nondescript office building downtown. The woman who interviewed me, Miss Chen, seemed more interested in my psychological profile than my cleaning experience. She asked strange questions like whether I believed in supernatural phenomena, how I handled isolation, and if I'd ever experienced unexplained events. I figured it was some corporate psychological assessment nonsense, so I gave the answers I thought they wanted to hear. But here's what really caught my attention during that interview, and this is important. When I asked about the specific location, Miss Chan's demeanor completely shifted. She became very serious and handed me a thick packet of rules and regulations, not your typical don't steal office supplies kind of rules. These were specific, detailed instructions that made no sense at the time but would literally save my life later. I got the job on the spot, which should have been red flag number 2. They wanted me to start that very night, which was red flag number 3, but I needed the money. And honestly, how hard could it be to mop floors and empty trash cans in an empty building? The Riverside Mall had been closed for about 2 years after anchor stores pulled out during the pandemic. From the outside, it looked like every other dead mall in America. Broken fountain, half the exterior lights burned out, weeds growing through cracks in the parking lot. But when I showed up for my first shift at 10 p.m., there were more cars in the employee lot than I expected for a supposedly empty building. My supervisor, Jake, met me at the service entrance. He'd been working night maintenance there for about 8 months, and I could tell immediately that something was off about him. He had this constant, nervous energy. He was always listening for something. His eyes darted around constantly, and he jumped at every small sound. First night, huh? Jake said, unlocking a series of heavy doors I hadn't noticed during the day. Before we go in, you read through the rule packet, right? I nodded, though honestly, I'd only skimmed it. The thing was like 40 pages long, filled with the most bizarrely specific instructions I'd ever seen. Things like never enter any store that still has its security gates down, and if you hear music playing from the old arcade area after midnight, do not investigate. I figured it was just corporate liability protection taken to an extreme. Good? Jake continued, though something in his voice suggested he didn't believe me. Because those rules aren't suggestions, they're not insurance requirements or safety theater. Every single one of them was written because something happened, something bad. He led me through the service corridors, and immediately I noticed the mall felt wrong. I can't explain it better than that. The temperature was inconsistent, shifting from uncomfortably warm to surprisingly cold as we moved through different sections. The air had a strange quality to it. It was thicker somehow, and despite being abandoned for 2 years, there was an underlying electrical hum that suggested far more power was being used than necessary for basic security lighting. Your primary job, Jake explained as we walked, is cleaning and basic maintenance in the approved zones. But you're also here to observe and report. If you see anything unusual, anything at all, you document it immediately and radio it in. Don't try to handle situations yourself. Don't investigate sounds or lights or anything else that seems off. Just report and continue your assigned task. We entered the main concourse, and I got my first real look at the inside of the mall. It should have been dark, except for security lighting, but somehow there was more ambient light than made sense. Some of the storefronts still had their displays up, mannequins frozen in poses that looked almost too lifelike in the strange lighting. Others were completely dark, their security gates down, looking like metal mouths with broken teeth. Those gated stores, Jake said, noticing my attention, are absolutely off limits. We call them the restricted zones. The cleaning crew that works days handles those areas with special equipment and protocols. You don't have that training or clearance. He handed me a radio, a detailed floor plan, and a key ring with more keys than I could count. Your route is marked in blue on the map. Stick to it exactly. The bathroom cleaning supplies are in the marked closets. The floor maintenance equipment is in the central storage area. And Marcus, he grabbed my arm as I was studying the map. The most important rule of all. If you hear your name being called and you're sure it's not coming from your radio, do not answer. Do not investigate. Continue your work and report it immediately. That first night started normally enough. I began my route on the upper level, working my way through the sections marked as approved zones. Mostly it was standard janitorial work, sweeping, mopping, cleaning the few remaining public restrooms, emptying trash cans that shouldn't have had trash in them but somehow always did. But about an hour into my shift, I started noticing details that didn't add up. Some of the stores that were supposed to be empty had lights on deep in their interiors. Not bright lights, but a faint glow like from computer screens or emergency lighting. When I radioed Jake about it, his response was immediate and sharp. Do not approach those stores, note the locations and continue your route. But shouldn't we check if someone broke in or left equipment running? Marcus, this is exactly what I'm talking about. Document it and move on. That's not our job. As the night progressed, the mall seemed to come alive in ways that made no sense. I started hearing sounds that shouldn't exist in an empty building. Footsteps echoing from other levels, the distant sound of cash registers. Once, I could have sworn I heard children laughing near the old play area, but when I looked it was completely dark and empty. The strangest part was the smells. In different areas of the mall, I'd catch scents that brought back vivid memories. Near the old food court, the smell of pizza and Chinese food would be so strong it made my mouth water. By the former bookstore, I'd smell fresh coffee and new paper. These weren't faint traces left over from when the stores were operating. These were strong, fresh scents that seemed to appear and disappear as I moved through the space. Around 3 a.m. I was cleaning the restrooms near the old department store anchor when I heard something that made me freeze. Piano music, soft and melancholic, was drifting from somewhere deeper in the mall. It was a song I recognized but couldn't play, something that felt familiar and deeply sad at the same time. I radioed Jake immediately. I'm hearing piano music coming from somewhere in the mall. There was a long pause before he responded. What's your current location? Restrooms by the old Macy's. Another pause. That's the music from the old piano store. Used to be on the lower level near the fountain. Store's been gutted for over a year and they removed the pianos when the store closed. So where's the music coming from? That's not the right question, Marcus. The right question is why can you hear it tonight? Document the time, your location, and continue your route. Do not investigate. I wanted to argue, but something in Jake's tone suggested this wasn't the time for questions. I noted everything in my incident report and continued working. But the music followed me for the next hour, sometimes louder, sometimes softer, but always there in the background. The weirdest part of that first night came around 5 a.m. I was finishing up my route cleaning the main concourse when I noticed someone sitting on one of the benches near the old fountain. From a distance it looked like an elderly woman in a pink sweater, just sitting peacefully with her hands folded in her lap. My first instinct was to approach and ask if she needed help, maybe call security about someone being in the building after hours. But something in my memory clicked and I checked the rule packet instead. Rule number 23. If you observe individuals in the main concourse during your shift, do not approach or interact. Continue your assigned tasks and report the sighting. I radioed it in immediately. Jake's response was quick and calm. This was completely routine. Copy that? Elderly woman in pink sweater, sitting by the fountain? Yes, exactly. How did you know what she was wearing? Continue your route. She'll be gone by the time you finish. And she was. When I looked back toward the fountain 20 minutes later, the bench was empty. But here's the thing that really got to me. As I was leaving that morning, I mentioned the woman to Jake. And he showed me something that made my blood run cold. He pulled out a thick binder filled with incident reports going back 8 months. Page after page of similar sightings, all documented by different night maintenance workers. The elderly woman in the pink sweater appeared in at least 30 different reports. Always in the same location, always wearing the same outfit, always gone by morning. Who is she? I asked. Jake closed the binder and locked it in his desk. That's above my pay grade. But I can tell you that every person who's worked this job has seen her, and everyone who's followed the rules and just documented the sighting has kept their job and their sanity. He paused and looked at me seriously. There was one guy, about 6 months ago, who decided he was going to approach her and ask what she was doing there. We found him the next morning sitting in his car in the parking lot, completely catatonic. He couldn't speak for 3 days, and when he finally could talk, all he would say was, "She's been waiting so long." He quit that week and moved out of state. I went home that morning with more questions than answers, but I needed the job. Over the next few weeks, I settled into a routine. Show up at 10 p.m., get my assignments from Jake, complete my route while documenting anything unusual, and leave by 6 a.m. The work itself was straightforward, but the environment never stopped being unsettling. Each night brought new anomalies. Sometimes I'd find fresh bouquets of flowers in the old flower shop that had been cleared out months ago. The flowers would be perfectly arranged, completely fresh, with no explanation for how they got there. Other nights I'd hear shopping carts rolling through the concourse, but when I'd look, there would be nothing there. The restricted zones behind the security gates were the source of the most disturbing incidents. Even though I wasn't supposed to go near them, I couldn't help but notice that some of them seemed to be operating in some capacity. I'd see lights moving inside, shadows passing by the windows, and sometimes hear voices having conversations in languages I couldn't identify. One night, about a month into the job, I was cleaning near the old electronics store when I heard something that made me stop dead in my tracks. It was the sound of dozens of televisions and radios all playing at once, creating a chaotic symphony of news broadcast, music, and static. The sound was definitely coming from behind the security gate of the electronics store, which had supposedly been completely cleared out. I radioed Jake, and his response was more urgent than usual. "What's your exact location?" "About 10 feet from the entrance to the old circuit central. Move away from that area immediately and continue your route from the opposite end of the mall." "Shouldn't we investigate? It sounds like someone's in there with a lot of equipment." "Marcus, listen to me very carefully. That store has been gutted. There's no electrical power to that unit. There's no equipment in there. Move away now." I followed his instructions, but as I walked away, I could have sworn I heard my name being called from inside the store. Not over the radio, but called out in a voice I almost recognized. I stopped for a second, trying to place the voice, when Jake's voice crackled over the radio. "Whatever you think you're hearing, ignore it and keep moving." The incident that really changed everything happened during my 6th week on the job. I was working a particularly quiet Tuesday night when Jake radioed me around 2 a.m. with an unusual request. Marcus, I need you to add an extra task to your route tonight. There's a storage room on the upper level, near the old bookstore. Room 2B, according to your map. I need you to go in there and retrieve a red filing box from the shelf marked Incident Reports Archive. This was the first time Jake had asked me to do anything other than basic cleaning and documentation. Is this part of regular maintenance? Not regular, but it's necessary. The day crew requested some old incident reports for their review. Just grab the red box and bring it to the security office. I found the storage room easily enough. It was unlocked, which seemed odd for a room containing important files. Inside, it looked like a typical office storage space. Metal shelving units lined the walls filled with boxes, cleaning supplies, and old mall directories and promotional materials. But as I was looking for the red filing box, I noticed something strange. Many of the boxes were labeled with dates going back decades, not just from the recent closure, but from the 1980s, 1990s, and early 2000s. Why would they keep incident reports from when the mall was operational and successful? I found the red box Jake had requested, but curiosity got the better of me. I opened it before taking it downstairs. Inside were hundreds of incident reports, but these weren't maintenance issues or customer complaints. These were reports of unexplained phenomena filed by security guards, maintenance workers, and even store employees going back over 20 years. The earliest report in the box was from 1987, filed by a security guard named Robert Chen. Yes, the same last name as the woman who interviewed me. The report described an incident where multiple employees reported seeing customers shopping in stores after hours, but when security arrived to investigate, the stores would be empty with no signs of forced entry. As I flipped through the reports, a pattern emerged. Year after year, decade after decade, people working in the mall after hours reported the same types of phenomena. Unexplained lights and sounds, the smell of food from closed restaurants, music from empty stores, and most frequently, sightings of people who seemed to be shopping or walking around the mall during closed hours. But here's what really caught my attention. Starting around 2019, the reports changed. Instead of isolated incidents, they became systematic documentation of ongoing phenomena. Someone had been studying whatever was happening in this mall, cataloging it, trying to understand it. I found a series of reports filed by someone with the initial DC, which I assumed was another Chen family member. These reports weren't just documenting incidents, they were analyzing patterns. DC had identified regular occurrences, mapped them to specific locations, and even theorized about what might be causing them. According to these reports, the Riverside Mall sits on land that was previously a residential neighborhood that was demolished in the early 1970s. But before that, the area had been farmland. That was the site of a small community that existed in the early 1900s. DC's theory was that the mall had somehow become a focal point for residual energy from all the previous uses of the land. The most chilling report was dated just 3 months before I was hired. DC had documented a significant increase in activity, noting that whatever was happening in the mall was becoming stronger and more frequent. The report concluded with a recommendation that the mall be permanently sealed and the land left undeveloped. I was so absorbed in reading the reports that I lost track of time. When I finally looked up, I realized I'd been in the storage room for over an hour. My radio had been silent, which was unusual because Jake typically checked in every 30 minutes or so. I tried radioing Jake to let him know I had found the requested box but got no response. After several attempts, I decided to just take the box down to the security office as instructed and find Jake there. But when I got to the security office, it was empty. Jake's jacket was still hanging on his chair and his coffee was still warm, but he was nowhere to be found. I tried radioing him again, but the radio just produced static. The mall felt different than it had earlier in the night. The usual background sounds, the electrical hums and settling noises that I had gotten used to seemed muffled. It was too quiet, like the building was holding its breath. I decided to continue with my regular cleaning route while waiting for Jake to return, but as I worked I kept noticing things that didn't seem right. Lights that I was sure had been off earlier were now on. Trash cans that I had already emptied were full again. Most unsettling, I found wet footprints on floors that I had just mopped dry. Around 4 a.m. I heard Jake's voice over the radio, but it sounded strange, distorted. "Marcus, where are you right now?" "Upper level, near the old Barnes and Noble." "Where have you been?" "I've been trying to reach you for 2 hours. I've been dealing with a situation. I need you to come to the main concourse immediately." Something in his voice didn't sound right, but I couldn't put my finger on what was bothering me. I made my way down to the main concourse, but when I got there, Jake wasn't waiting for me. "Jake, I'm at the main concourse. Where are you?" No response. I tried several more times, but the radio remained silent. I stood in the empty concourse, feeling increasingly uneasy. The elderly woman in the pink sweater wasn't there tonight, which somehow made everything feel more ominous. I decided to check the security office again, thinking maybe Jake had returned while I was walking to the concourse. But as I made my way through the mall, I started noticing that some of the restricted stores behind the security gates were showing more activity than I'd ever seen before. Lights were moving inside multiple units, and I could hear what sounded like normal shopping activity, conversations, footsteps, the beeping of cash registers, even shopping carts rolling across floors. When I reached the security office, I found something that made my stomach drop. The red filing box I'd retrieved was sitting open on Jake's desk, and all the incident reports were scattered across the surface, but that's not what scared me. What scared me was that there were new reports on top of the pile, written in handwriting I didn't recognize, documenting events that had supposedly happened tonight while I was working. One report, dated just 2 hours ago, described a maintenance worker named Marcus investigating unusual sounds in storage room 2B. Another report, written in the same unfamiliar handwriting, documented the same Marcus finding wet footprints in areas he had just cleaned. These reports were describing my exact activities from tonight, but they were written as if someone else was observing and documenting my behavior. I grabbed my radio and tried Jake again, but instead of static, I heard something that made my blood run cold. It was Jake's voice, but he was having a conversation with someone else and they were talking about me. "The new guy is asking too many questions," Jake's voice said to the radio. "They always do at first," replied a voice I didn't recognize. But he followed the protocols tonight. He documented everything properly and didn't try to investigate the restricted areas. He read the archived reports in storage room 2B. That wasn't part of the plan. We know. We've been monitoring him. The question is whether he's ready to learn the truth, or if we need to transfer him to day shift maintenance. I quickly turned off my radio, realizing they somehow didn't know I was listening. But how were they monitoring me, and what truth were they talking about? I decided I needed to get out of the building immediately, but as I headed toward the service exit, I found that all the doors I had used to enter the building were now locked from the inside. The electronic locks required a key card that I didn't have. My regular keys didn't work. That's when I heard footsteps echoing through the mall, coming from multiple directions. Not the mysterious footsteps I'd grown accustomed to, but deliberate, purposeful footsteps of people who were definitely real and definitely looking for me. I found a hiding spot behind the customer service counter and tried to think through what was happening. The job posting, the strange interview questions, the detailed rules, Jake's nervous behavior, the ongoing documentation of paranormal activity, none of this was coincidental. I had been hired for a very specific reason, and that reason had nothing to do with janitorial work. From my hiding spot, I watched as several people entered the main concourse. I recognized Miss Chen from my interview, but she was dressed differently now, not in business attire, but in what looked like scientific field gear. With her were three other people I'd never seen before, all carrying equipment that looked more suited for paranormal investigation than more maintenance. Marcus, Miss Chen called out, her voice echoing through the empty space. We know you're here, and we know you've been reading the archived reports. We're not here to hurt you, we need to talk. I remained hidden, but I could hear them moving through the mall, their equipment beeping and clicking as they worked. The phenomena in this location have been increasing exponentially over the past 6 months. Miss Chen continued, apparently talking to her team, but loud enough for me to hear. We needed someone with the right psychological profile to document the recent changes. Marcus has been providing excellent data. One of the other team members spoke up. His reports show that the temporal displacement events are becoming more frequent and more complex. The entities aren't just residual anymore, they're becoming interactive. Temporal displacement events. Entities? I was starting to realize that everything I'd been experiencing wasn't just unexplained phenomena, it was something much more organized and much more dangerous. Marcus, Miss Chen called again. Jake is fine. He's monitoring you from the observation room. All of our night maintenance workers are part of a controlled study. You've been helping us understand something very important. Against my better judgment, I stood up from behind the counter. What kind of study? What do you mean by temporal displacement? Miss Chen approached me slowly, her hands visible and non-threatening. The Riverside Mall isn't just built on land with a complicated history. It's built on what we call the temporal junction point. The emotional and psychic energy from decades of human activity has created a space where past and present overlap. She gestured around the empty mall. What you've been experiencing and documenting isn't ghosts or supernatural phenomena. You've been witnessing moments from the mall's past bleeding through into the present. The elderly woman you see is Mrs. Patterson, who used to come here every Tuesday for 20 years until she passed away in 2019. The shopping sounds, the smells, the lights in empty stores, and those are all echoes of the mall's most active periods. One of her team members held up a device that looked like a cross between a Geiger counter and a smartphone. The temporal bleeding has been increasing dramatically. 6 months ago, these overlaps lasted minutes, now they're lasting hours, and they're becoming more solid, more real. But why hire janitors? Why not just study it yourselves? Because, Miss Chen explained, the phenomena responds to regular human presence. The more someone works in this environment, the stronger the temporal bleeding becomes around them. You've essentially been acting as a catalyst, strengthening the connection between past and present. I looked around the mall with new understanding. So, all those rules in the handbook are designed to keep you safe while allowing the phenomena to manifest around you. The restricted areas behind the security gates aren't empty, they're experiencing temporal overlaps so strong that entering them could trap you in the past. We've had to extract 3 researchers from temporal loops over the years. Jake's voice crackled over my radio. Sorry about the deception, Marcus, but we needed authentic reactions and natural behavior. If you'd known what was really happening, your presence wouldn't have had the same effect on the temporal field. This was all too much to process. So I've been unknowingly participating in some kind of paranormal research experiment. Not paranormal, corrected one of the team members. Temporal physics. What's happening here has implications far beyond one abandoned mall. We're studying the first documented case of sustained temporal overlap in a contemporary setting. Ms. Chen pulled out a tablet and showed me a complex chart covered in data points. Your incident reports have been crucial in mapping the patterns. We now know that the temporal bleeding follows predictable cycles based on emotional significance. Tuesday nights show the highest activity because that's when Mrs. Patterson used to do her weekly shopping. The piano music appears strongest during evening hours because that's when the piano store used to hold the recitals. The wet footprints, the trash cans refilling themselves, the fresh flowers, those aren't mysterious phenomena. They are the mall's past overlapping with its present. You're literally witnessing the same spaces being used simultaneously by people from different time periods. I sat down on one of the benches trying to wrap my head around what I was being told, but I can interact with these temporal overlaps. I can smell the food, hear the conversations, see the lights. Exactly, said Miss Chen. That's what makes this so significant. Usually, temporal displacement creates what we call ghost echoes, faint impressions of past events, but something about this location is creating full sensory overlaps. The past isn't just bleeding through, it's becoming temporarily real. Jake emerged from a hidden doorway I'd never noticed before, looking relieved. The reason we needed you to work alone and document everything was to establish baseline data on how the temporal field affects someone without prior knowledge of the phenomena. Your genuine reactions have been invaluable. But what happens now? Now that I know the truth, Miss Chen exchanged glances with her team. That depends. We could transfer you to day shift work at a normal location, pay you a severance bonus, and ask you to sign a confidentiality agreement, or you could join our research team officially. Your natural sensitivity to the temporal phenomena makes you an ideal candidate for advanced studies. We have similar sites in 3 other states, and we're always looking for people who can work effectively in temporally unstable environments. One of the team members added, the pay is significantly better, and you'd be contributing to research that could revolutionize our understanding of time and consciousness. I looked around the mall one more time, seeing it with completely different eyes. The mysterious sounds, the unexplained sights, the eerie feelings, none of it was threatening or supernatural. I had been witnessing the most incredible scientific phenomenon imaginable. What kind of advanced studies? Ms. Chan smiled. We've been monitoring 7 locations across the country where similar temporal overlaps occur. An old theater in Ohio where audience members from different decades attend the same performances simultaneously. A diner in New Mexico where customers from the 1950s and present day sit at the same counter. A library in Maine where patrons from different time periods check out books from the same collection. Jake pulled out a folder thick with documentation. Each site requires specialized maintenance and monitoring. The work is similar to what you've been doing here, documenting phenomena, following safety protocols, and serving as a human catalyst for temporal activity. The goal, explained Ms. Chen, is to understand how these temporal junction points form and whether we can predict or even create them intentionally. The implications for physics, archaeology, and historical research are enormous. I realized that this opportunity was unlike anything I could have imagined when I applied for a simple janitorial position. What would the advanced research involve? One of the team members opened a laptop and showed me footage from other sites. At the theater in Ohio, we've documented conversations between audience members from the 1940s and researchers from our time. The temporal overlap is so complete that both groups can see and interact with each other, though neither fully understands. They're from different time periods. The footage was incredible. I watched as people in 1940s clothing sat next to people in modern dress, all watching the same performance, all apparently unaware that they were sharing the experience across decades. At the diner in New Mexico, we've been able to interview customers from the past about historical events, getting first-hand accounts of things that happened 70 years ago, but the interactions have to be carefully managed to avoid temporal paradoxes. Ms. Chen pulled up another file. The most advanced site is the library in Maine, We've discovered that books checked out by patrons from the past actually disappear from the present day collection until the past patrons return them. We are essentially witnessing a temporal lending system that operates across multiple decades simultaneously. The scope of what they were describing was staggering. How many people know about this research? The project involves about 50 researchers across multiple universities and government agencies. We operate under strict confidentiality protocols because the implications are so significant. If temporal manipulation became widely known before we understand it properly, it could be extremely dangerous. Jake sat down next to me. I've been working on these sites for 3 years now. It's the most incredible job you can imagine. Every night brings new discoveries about the nature of time and reality. I thought about everything I'd experienced over the past 6 weeks. The fear and confusion I'd felt was being replaced by excitement and curiosity. What would my role be specifically? Miss Chen outlined the position. You'd be a temporal field specialist. Your job would be to work in temporally active environments, document all phenomena, conduct controlled interactions with temporal overlaps when safe to do so, and help develop new protocols for temporal research. The training program is 6 months and you'd work with experienced researchers at each site. After completing training, you'd be assigned to lead research teams at new temporal junction points we discover. One of the team members added, "We're also working on developing technology that might allow for more controlled temporal interactions. Your experience working in natural temporal fields would be invaluable for testing new equipment and procedures." I realized that I was being offered the chance to be part of groundbreaking scientific research that could change our understanding of reality itself. What are the risks? Miss Chen was honest about the dangers. Temporal displacement can cause disorientation, memory confusion, and in extreme cases, temporal anchoring, where someone becomes partially stuck between time periods. We've had researchers experience temporary amnesia, and one person spent 3 days convinced they were living in 1987. But, Jake added, the safety protocols have improved dramatically. We now understand much more about how to work safely in temporal fields. The rules you have been following here are based on 3 years of research and experience. I looked around the mall one final time as a simple night janitor. The next time I entered this building, it would be as a researcher studying one of the most incredible phenomena in human history. I want to join the research team. Miss Chen smiled and extended her hand. "Welcome to the Temporal Studies Project, Marcus. Your real work is just beginning." Over the next few hours, they explained the logistics of my transition to the research team. I would complete my remaining shifts at the mall while beginning basic training in temporal physics and safety protocols. Within a month, I would visit all 7 known temporal junction sites to understand the variety of phenomena we were studying. As dawn approached and we prepared to leave the mall, I asked one final question. What causes these temporal junction points to form? Miss Chen paused at the exit. We're still working on that. Our current theory is that locations with intense, repeated emotional experiences, places where thousands of people have felt joy, nostalgia, community, or other strong emotions over many years, can create what we call temporal resonance. The Riverside Mall was a community center for this area for over 30 years. Families shopped here, teenagers hung out here. People had first dates and proposal dinners in the restaurants. All of that emotional energy seems to have created a kind of temporal echo chamber. Jake locked the door behind us as we left. The really interesting part is that the temporal activity has increased since the mall closed. And we think the contrast between the emotional energy of the past and the emptiness of the present has created a kind of temporal vacuum that's pulling the past into the present. As I drove home that morning, I realized that my life had completely changed. What had started as a desperate search for any job to pay the bills had become an opportunity to be part of the most incredible scientific discovery of our time. The next few months flew by as I dove into the training program. I learned about temporal field theory, practiced using specialized equipment for measuring temporal distortions, and studied the detailed documentation from all 7 research sites. Each location was unique but followed similar patterns. The theater in Ohio had been built on the site of a vaudeville house that burned down in 1943, killing 37 people. The temporal overlaps there seemed to be driven by the unfinished performances and the audience members, who never got to see the shows that were interrupted by the fire. The diner in New Mexico had been a popular stop on Route 66 for decades, serving millions of travelers who were passing through to new lives and adventures. The temporal activity there centered around the hopes and dreams of people who had sat at those counters planning their futures. The library in Maine was perhaps the most complex site. Built in 1892, it had served as a center of learning and community gathering for over a century. The temporal overlaps there involved not just patrons from different eras, but also books that existed in multiple time periods simultaneously. My first assignment as a full temporal field specialist was at a newly discovered site in Colorado, an abandoned amusement park that had operated from 1961 to 1989. The park had been a destination for families throughout the Rocky Mountain region, and local residents had been reporting unusual phenomena since it closed. Working at the amusement park was both thrilling and challenging. Unlike the mall, which had subtle temporal overlaps, the park experienced what we call temporal storms, periods where multiple decades of activity occurred simultaneously across the entire site. During these storms, I could walk through the abandoned park and see it as it existed in different eras. The carousel would be spinning with children from the 1960s, while teenagers from the 1980s hung out by the arcade games, all sharing the same physical space but existing in different time periods. My job was to document these temporal storms, map their patterns, and conduct controlled interactions when safe. Over the course of 6 months, I was able to interview dozens of people from the park's past, gathering historical information and helping our team understand how temporal fields interact with human consciousness. The most incredible discovery came when we realized that people within temporal overlaps could sometimes see across time periods. A little girl from 1967 once asked me why I was wearing such funny clothes, and a teenager from 1983 wanted to know what kind of music player I was carrying when he saw my smartphone. These cross-temporal interactions became the focus of my specialized research. Working with linguists and psychologists, we developed protocols for communicating across time periods without causing temporal paradoxes or psychological trauma to the people we encountered. After 2 years with the Temporal Studies project, I was promoted to lead field specialist, and given my own research team, we were tasked with investigating reports of temporal phenomena at locations across the country and determining which sites warranted full research operations. The work took me to amazing places. We studied a jazz club in New Orleans, where musicians from the 1920s still performed for audiences that included people from multiple decades. We investigated the train station in Chicago, where passengers from the golden age of rail travel still waited on platforms alongside modern commuters who couldn't see them. Each site taught us more about the nature of time and consciousness, but the most significant breakthrough came 3 years into my work with the project, when we discovered something that changed everything we thought we knew about temporal fields. We were investigating a reported temporal anomaly at an old movie theater in Portland, Oregon. The theater had been built in 1928 and had operated continuously until 2018, showing everything from silent films to the latest blockbusters. Local residents reported seeing the theater's marquee displaying movies from different decades, sometimes simultaneously. What we found there was unlike anything we'd encountered before. Instead of simple temporal overlaps where past events bled into the present, the Portland theater was experiencing what we termed temporal convergence. All 90 years of the theater's operation were happening simultaneously in the same space. Walking into that theater was like stepping into a living museum of cinema history. In the main auditorium, I could see audiences from every decade of the theater's existence watching different movies on the same screen. A family from 1952 might be watching Singing in the Rain, while teenagers from 1987 were watching The Princess Bride, and a couple from 2015 was watching a Marvel movie. All at the same time, all in the same seat. But here's what made this discovery revolutionary. The people from different time periods could not only see each other, they could interact meaningfully. I watched a woman from the 1940s share popcorn with a child from the 1990s. I saw an elderly man from 1963 have a deep conversation about movies with a college student from 2010. What we realized was that the theater had become a kind of temporal neutral zone where the normal rules of time didn't apply. The shared experience of watching movies, the collective emotional responses to stories, the communal nature of cinema had created a space where past, present, and future could coexist peacefully. This discovery led to a major expansion of our research. If we could understand how temporal convergence worked, we might be able to create controlled environments where people could literally visit the past or future. The implications for education, historical research, and human understanding were staggering. I spent 8 months at the Portland Theater, documenting every aspect of the temporal convergence. Working with physicists from MIT and Stanford, we developed new theories about how consciousness and time interact in spaces with strong emotional resonance. The breakthrough moment came when we realized that the temporal convergence wasn't random. It followed patterns based on the emotional significance of the movies being shown. When the theater showed particularly beloved films, the temporal field would strengthen, allowing for clearer interaction between time periods. During showings of universally acclaimed movies like Casablanca or The Wizard of Oz, the convergence would become so complete that people from different decades could have extended conversations and even form friendships. I documented dozens of these cross-temporal relationships. There was Margaret, a widowed grandmother from 1955 who became close friends with Sarah, a college student from 2008. They would meet every Tuesday night during the theater's classic film screenings, sharing stories about their lives, their dreams, and their experiences across the decades. There was Robert, a World War II veteran from 1947 who formed a deep bond with David, an Iraq War veteran from 2016. Despite being separated by 70 years, their shared experiences of war and homecoming allowed them to understand each other in ways that transcended time. These relationships taught us something profound about human connection. The emotions that drive us, love, fear, hope, loss, are constant across time. When people could connect on that emotional level, the temporal barriers seemed to dissolve completely. But perhaps the most important discovery came when we began to understand the role of collective memory in temporal convergence. The Portland Theater wasn't just a place where movies were shown. It was a repository of shared cultural experiences. Generations of families had attended movies together, experienced first dates, celebrated anniversaries, and created memories in that space. We theorize that temporal convergence occurs when a location becomes so saturated with shared human experiences that it transcends normal temporal boundaries. The theater had become a kind of temporal lighthouse, drawing moments of intense shared emotion from across its entire history into a single convergent present. This led us to investigate other potential convergence sites. We identified several locations that showed similar patterns. A baseball stadium in Boston where fans from different eras gathered to watch games that had happened across decades. A church in Virginia where congregations from multiple time periods attended the same services, and a school in California where students and teachers from the institution's entire 120-year history shared classes and hallways. Each convergence site required specialized protocols. Unlike the simple temporal overlaps we'd studied before, convergence environments were dynamic and unpredictable. The temporal fields could shift rapidly, and researchers could easily become disoriented or temporarily displaced if proper precautions weren't followed. I developed new safety procedures based on what we learned at these sites. Teams working in convergence environments had to maintain constant communication, use specialized tracking devices to monitor their temporal position, and follow strict interaction guidelines to prevent paradoxes or temporal contamination. The work was incredibly rewarding but also physically and mentally demanding. Extended exposure to convergence fields caused what we called temporal fatigue, a condition where researchers began to experience memory confusion and difficulty distinguishing between past and present experiences. After 6 months of intensive work in convergence environments, I started experiencing temporal fatigue myself. I would find myself remembering conversations with people from the 1950s as if they had happened yesterday, or becoming confused about which decade I was actually living in. The project psychologist recommended a 6-month rotation to normal temporal environments to allow my consciousness to recalibrate. During my recovery period, I was assigned to work with our technology development team. We were creating new instruments for measuring and mapping temporal fields, developing communication devices that could work across time periods, and designing safety equipment for researchers working in high-intensity temporal environments. The most exciting project was the development of what we call temporal anchors, devices that could help researchers maintain their connection to their original time period. While working in convergence environments, these anchors use a combination of quantum field manipulation and biometric monitoring to create a kind of temporal safety line. Testing the temporal anchors led to another major breakthrough. We discovered that some people were naturally resistant to temporal displacement, while others were highly sensitive to temporal fields. This led to the development of aptitude tests that could identify individuals with natural temporal abilities. People with high temporal sensitivity could interact more easily with past individuals and navigate temporal overlaps with minimal disorientation. Those with temporal resistance were ideal for maintaining equipment and conducting research in highly unstable temporal environments without risk of displacement. I scored extremely high on temporal sensitivity tests, which explained why I had adapted so quickly to working at the mall and had been so successful in convergence environments. This classification led to my assignment to our most ambitious project yet, attempting to create an artificial temporal convergence. The project was based on our theory that temporal convergence required 3 elements: a location with intense shared emotional experiences, a catalyst to strengthen the temporal field, and a focal point for the convergence to center around. We selected an abandoned concert hall in Nashville that had hosted thousands of performances over 60 years. The hall had been the site of significant musical history, including legendary performances by country, rock, and folk artists. The emotional resonance was perfect for our experiment. My role was to serve as the primary temporal catalyst, using my sensitivity to strengthen and guide the developing convergence field. Working with a team of 12 researchers, we spent 3 months preparing the site with specialized equipment and establishing baseline measurements. The experiment was scheduled to run for 72 hours with continuous monitoring and documentation. What we achieved exceeded all our expectations and fundamentally changed our understanding of temporal physics. Within 6 hours of beginning the experiment, we had successfully created a limited temporal convergence. Musicians and audience members from different decades began appearing in the concert hall, initially as faint apparitions, but growing more solid and interactive as the field strengthened. By the second day, we had achieved full convergence. The concert hall was hosting simultaneous performances from across its entire history. A bluegrass band from 1962 was sharing the stage with a rock group from 1985, while an acoustic folk singer from 1978 played in the lobby. Audiences from multiple decades filled the seats, applauding performances from across time. But the most incredible moment came on the third day of the experiment. The temporal convergence had become so complete that new performances began emerging. Collaborations between musicians from different time periods who had never met in their original timelines, but could now play together across the decades. I watched Johnny Cash's performance from 1969 blend seamlessly with a punk rock show from 1983, creating a hybrid performance that existed only in the convergence field. The audience, drawn from 60 years of concert goers, responded with an enthusiasm that transcended any single time period. The experiment proved that artificial temporal convergence was possible, but it also revealed the enormous power and unpredictability of these fields. On the final day, the convergence became so intense that several team members experienced temporary displacement, finding themselves briefly existing in past decades before the anchor systems pulled them back to the present. When we shut down the experiment after 72 hours, the concert hall returned to its abandoned state. But the implications of what we had achieved were staggering. We had demonstrated that time itself could be manipulated through controlled application of human consciousness and emotional resonance. The success of the Nashville experiment led to increased funding and recognition for the Temporal Studies project. We were contacted by universities, government agencies, and international research organizations interested in collaborating on temporal research. But with that recognition came new responsibilities and ethical concerns. The ability to create artificial temporal convergence meant we could potentially allow people to visit historical events, meet deceased loved ones, or experience moments from the past firsthand. The philosophical and moral implications were enormous. As I reflect on my journey from desperate job seeker to leading researcher in the humanity's most cutting-edge scientific field, I'm amazed by how much we've learned and how much we still don't understand about the nature of time and consciousness. What started as a simple night shift cleaning empty stores has become a career studying the deepest mysteries of existence. Every day brings new discoveries about how human emotion and experience can transcend the boundaries of time itself. The Temporal Studies project continues to grow and evolve. We now have research sites in 12 countries, and we are training a new generation of temporal field specialists to continue this incredible work. The implications for human knowledge and understanding are limitless. If you're ever offered a job that seems too strange to be true, that comes with unusually detailed rules, or that requires you to work alone in environments that feel somehow wrong, I encourage you to consider that you might be stepping into something far more significant than you could ever imagine. Sometimes the most extraordinary discoveries begin with the most ordinary circumstances. Sometimes a simple job application can lead to revelations that change everything we think we know about reality. What do you think? Have you ever experienced unexplained phenomena that might have been temporal in nature? Share your stories in the comments. Our research team is always looking for new potential sites to investigate. If you found this story fascinating, make sure to like and subscribe for more incredible tales from the frontiers of human discovery. The universe is far stranger and more wonderful than any of us realize. And these stories are just the beginning of what we're learning about the true nature of time, consciousness, and reality itself.